So,
Any
yeah.
preferences over the years between the two?
Well, it seemed like if I was active in one, I needed to back off on the other a little bit. But I was real active in each of them. I've been on the board of both, as you know. And the year that they asked me to be president of ACES, or to stand for president of ACES, they also asked me to stand for president of SLA. Well, that was a Hobson's choice, because my intellectual home was at ACES. My customer home was at that time at SLA. But the thing that really made me decide was, I'm one of those in for a penny, in for a pound people. So, you know, if you're going to be involved, you're going to do it wholeheartedly. And I figured that SLA presidency would take me about 20 hours a week. And I figured that
20 hours a week?
A week to do it right. And I thought ACES would take me about 5 hours a week, just because of the way the places were organized and so on. And because of the way they organized their presidencies, which was a bit different. And I was about right, I think.
Really?
For SLA, you had to do, at that time, at least 14 chapter visits a year, which meant, you know, travel to a lot of places. And I don't mind travel, as you know, I travel a lot.
But to say your life is on the road.
But yeah, but it seemed like an awful lot of travel. And then they had their board meetings and the finance committee meetings and the AOOC meetings, and it was just constant stuff. And they had 2 meetings that would require at least a week each, being their annual and their winter meetings. Whereas ACES had a mid-year meeting and the annual meeting, and those aren't all that different in terms of time, although those meetings were a little bit shorter. But anyway, I chose ACES, and then SLA's never asked me again. I guess they were miffed or something. But I did serve twice on SLA's board. I chaired their first strategic planning committee, and that plan still stands fairly well, actually. I was on there for SLA. I was on all kinds of committees, everything from nominations and publications and strategic planning and so on. Over the years, it's all listed in my resume,
right.
And I've gotten a lot out of it. But the main reason for being active in SLA really was because of 2 things. One, the strong local chapter. It was a wonderful group of people, and the other was that a lot of my customers were there. It's no longer true. My customers are no longer at SLA. I'm not sure where everybody's gone, but for the most part, they don't go to SLA unless they're actually in the exhibit hall. But it used to be that people attending SLA were my customers as well, and so it made it a really important meeting for me to go to. For some reason, they don't have as many. But, you know, ACES has also changed significantly over the years. It used to have a huge exhibit hall, and then when Tom Hogan started his meetings, the ACES, I'm not sure if ACES...
Which meetings are you referring to?
The
online?
The online meeting, and then later this agglomeration of meetings that he has now, the Knowledge World and so on. But the what was it called? The NEAC, National Online Meeting, that Tom held for many years, started just about the time that ACES stopped having exhibits. And that made a significant hit to ACES, because the clientele then that were attending the ACES meetings changed a lot. So I counted up the number of practitioners at the ACES meeting this year, the ones that I thought could be stretched a little to include the practitioners, and it was about 8% of the meeting, whereas 18% of the people attending were students, mostly doctoral students, but they were students, and the rest were pretty much academics of some sort of stripe or another. But if you go back 20 years and you look at ACES, it was significantly heavy with people who were either with the government or with the private sector in some way or another. And In fact, I used to look at the ACES audiences, and you could kind of stratify them. So the academics were all up front, paying a lot of attention to the speaker. And the manager implementer types were pretty much in the middle. I mean, that's where you'd
Just
see.
not out in the hallway.
Well, no, so the implementers were in the middle of the audience, and then in the back and out in the hallway were either the entrepreneurs, the people who are running companies, or, you know, the general cabal. And I'll admit that I was in that back, and, you know, those back aisle seats, man, they're golden, and if the seats are locked down in the back, it's so annoying. You have to lift them up and pull them back because nobody wants to be in the middle of some row if they're of that stripe.
Right.
But you don't see those people in the back much anymore, and you don't see nearly as many middle managers in there either. The people are trying to figure out how to implement a project. And I'm not sure if that's because so many of the papers now at ACES are on a much smaller sample set. So the theoretical basis is what we all came for. That's what we all always came for, and that's what we still come for. But when you've got a sample set of 7, that's not going to hold up for anybody's data. It's just absurd. I read these papers where they're drawing all these conclusions from a sample of 7 articles. That is just really not sustainable at all. And I'm putting to bed a project right now. It's got 820,000 articles. They're all full text, and I'm indexing them with a keyword group, and I'm inline tagging them so that wherever the concept is mentioned in the article, you can zoom right to it and find the information. I'm doing another one where I'm indexing all the images within the text and identifying where to zoom right to them. And a sample size of 7 is just not going to get you very far when we have these avalanches of information pouring in on us. Everybody's talking about big data, and then you hear 50. I'm dealing with an article set of 50. You can download for free a whole lot more than 50 articles. Do something that's worthwhile and that you can really do as substance. So I don't know if it's because there's more of these student papers. I certainly love hearing a doctoral paper, but I'm talking about student papers where they're just really not, there's not enough there to get an idea to improve your business or improve your information access. And I think it's hurting ACES in the long run. Every now and then there'll be a meeting where the papers are just really gripping and spot on, or a session, but those are fewer and fewer, I'm finding at ACES, which I think is unfortunate, and I think that's really what's hitting the backdrop. I went to the classification research meeting this year, and there were 3 papers there that dealt with absolute minutia and a total lack of understanding on how subject terms are selected by the Library of Congress. And it's certainly widely published. All you got to do is read it. There's a reason why they don't put ephemeral terms in that particular list of subject headings. But so they were cute, and the people were enthusiastic, but there was no substance to the paper as far as I was concerned.
Well, let's go back to when you started at ACES. It's 78,
76.
76 with ACES.
Yep.
And what were the first kinds of things that you did? First impressions?
Well, there were two impressions that particularly stick with me, and one was that the papers were exhilarating. I mean, there were things being talked about there that I was peripheral to. Remember, I'm at NASA at the time, and I'm searching all these databases, and people are talking about how things work under the covers, how those databases are built, what's the theories behind them. And for me, it was exhilarating. It was absolutely thrilling to hear how to put that stuff together. I mean, there were real, this is how we think it works, and it would have worked better if we did it just a little differently here. And so it was a lot of theory meets implementation. People were coming up with theories, and then they were trying them out. They weren't just theorizing, they were actually applying their theories to data sets. And where it didn't work, they said so. We
These were
tried this and it
mostly
didn't
government
work.
people and information center managers.
Yeah, it was mostly people with big information collections.
Yeah.
And they'd heard some theory, and they were working hand in hand with academia. I mean, it was a wonderful partnership between the two. And the academe and the government were not just thought of money targets by the academics, they were actually partners. And so they got good funding because they approached it as a partnership, not as a handout. And it worked really well. And it wasn't just ACES that I went to. I was fortunate to get to go to a number of other meetings, and one of them was Cranfield Institute in the UK, where Cyril Cleverton, Tom Aitchison, and others held forth with how information works and how to weight terms and how ranking makes a difference and all of those kinds of things. It was impressive, and I listened to Sam Wolpert talk about his permaterm indexes that he was applying to business information based on the SIC codes, and how that worked. You know, what worked and what didn't, and why SIC needed to be extended 2 more digits in order to get to the depth of functionality or discrete level for indexing that everybody needed in order to retrieve the information they needed. And I listened to the Chem Abs guys talk about how to index chemical information. I mean, it was just absolutely thrilling time to be in the business. And I think that's probably why I stayed with it and switched out of botany, because it takes a long time to grow a plant on a mine dump, believe me. So, and people were so supportive because everybody was enthralled with the idea of how we're going to make this work. You know, and there were certainly curmudgeons around, people that would get in the back and they'd yell at each other. And I don't know if you remember Ev Brenner, but he would sit near the front and he would let people know if he disagreed with their thesis one way or another. And he was applying cool stuff. He was doing automatic indexing for the American Petroleum Institute for that center that he ran. And he was working from API in concert with the people at NASA and at DTIC to come up with a rules-based automatic indexing system, even then. And it was the indexing that Ev was doing from the Central Abstracting and Indexing Facility was incredible. And the way that then he could apply that to not just the petroleum literature, but also to the patent literature, and how to tease stuff out of the patent literature was fascinating. And then because I was in the private sector, I got to be involved in a lot of fun projects. So one of the things we did was digitize the patent collection, the U.S. PTO collection. So we had to scan it because it was all paper.
Your company bid on this project?
Yes, we did, and we had a partner in it, but we had to build special machines to scan the old patents, and the paper's brittle, so we had to vacuum move them and scan them on both sides, and paper's thin, so you had to worry about the bleed through and so on. And then once scanned, we had to digitize them, and we did OCR on them. I had a huge disagreement with David Grooms, who was in charge of the project for the patent office, and he and I had already worked together to build a database on NASA's space commercialization database when Dave was at NTIS, so he was a known commodity, and he was really fun to disagree with. But we had I thought that the accuracy level needed to be fairly high for accurate retrieval of the patent information. And he said, nope, I don't think so. He said, I think 95% accuracy is good enough. Well, that's 5 typos for every 100 characters. That's really ugly data. He says, no, that's good enough. So I said, no, I think it needs to be 99.98. And he said, nah, you don't need that kind of accuracy. And so we went back and forth and back and forth. And what we finally settled on was actually 97% accuracy, because average patent is 30 pages long, and the chances that the word you're looking for will be spelled right at least once in a full-text search. Now, full-text search was pretty cutting edge at that time, but the chances that it would be spelled right at least once in an article in a patent of 30 pages at 97% accuracy actually came out to 99.997. Okay, I'll grant you 1/100th of a point. But we had to prove it to each other, whether that would actually work or not, and whether the retrieval would be worthwhile, because that system that the patent office was implementing at that initial round was actually the messenger system with the Genie format that Chemical Abstracts had developed for their implementation of their platform when they brought the abstracts and titles online, instead of just the number and the indexing and the section. So, and we had helped with the missing abstracts for ChemAbs, and so it was a pretty cool thing. In fact, that that project for ChemAbs was a really difficult one in the end, because they had decided that they wanted to bring all the abstracts and titles online, full text, and space was expensive. So the idea that people would bring all that text online when we were used to just transactional machines was pretty unusual. So the implementation of putting text, full text, up online any place was a big deal. So ChemAbs just compromised on the abstracts and titles, which is what they owned anyway. They didn't own the journal article that they were indexing, but they did write their abstracts, so they certainly owned those. So they decided to put them up online, and I helped with the specifications for that, and we got what it needed to look like, and how we needed to take their photocomposition tapes and what we needed to convert them to, and we were all set.
Now, your company, again, is doing this,
my
right?
company.
You're working with Dale Baker and...
Yep, Dale
folks,
Baker and his...
Okay.
Well, mostly avoided Dale Baker and his fast hands, but I moved to, I worked with a lot of his folks, and he had a wonderful team. It was Ron Dunn and Nancy Amaral and Brian Canan and, what was his name, the technical guy? What'll come to me. And they were astute, and they were fun to work with. And so we had the model all done, and we're ready to start doing the conversion work. It's programmatic conversion with some checking of the articles to make sure that they're hitting the accuracy rates and all that. And they did want 99.998. And then they went to the vault to get the tapes, and they discovered that somebody destroyed the 9-track tapes that all the abstracts were on for a 15-year period. And they were just sick. So then they said, well, could you help us get these digitized? And I said, sure, because we were already working with some digital firms to keyboard stuff offshore. And we had established a company in Mexico called Access de Mexico, and a guy named Omar Alvarado Diaz was our partner down there, and it was a really fun crew of people, and we were working on these Mohawk systems and keyboarding to tape, and it was very avant-garde. Doesn't sound like it anymore, but it was at the time. And I was in Philadelphia and signed the contract with Ron. It's the biggest contract in my corporate history, 1985, and I spilled my tea on the contract. And then I telephoned the office and told Jay and Omar that we had the work. Well, we had worked really hard, ChemAbs had worked particularly hard to get 2 full sets of the volumes, because there were 18 volumes every 6 months for 15 years. It was a big amount of books. I don't know if you remember those things. They were that thick, and they were 8.5 by 11 sheets, and they were 8-point print. I mean, it was a big deal. So we had 2 complete sets, and one set we were going to guillotine so that they could be keyboarded. And the other set, we were keeping at our office to proofread against. So we're going to triple key, double proof the data so we could get to the right accuracy level. So I called September 18th, 1985 to, I think it was the 18th, to Jay and Omar, and he loaded all the books as baggage, and he flew Aeromexico to Mexico City, loaded them all in his car, in his trunk, and in the back seat, and drove home, and it was late, so, crash. Next morning, 7:17 a.m., was that 8.7 Richter scale earthquake. Collapsed our facility from 8 stories to 1.5. And only one person was killed because it was shift change. That was good. But the building was rubble. And we have this absolutely iconic picture of an 8-inch floppy in the window. The window is not broken. The entire building behind it is collapsed. It's just amazing.
Wow.
Fortunately, the books were still in the back of his car. Now, the garage had collapsed on top of the car, so the car was a pancake, but the books were in the trunk, so the car saved the books. But we had a deadline to meet. It was a 6-month project. So Jay took the books that we had at our place and flew to the Philippines. And he got caught in the sea of yellow armbands because Benito Aquino had been shot, and his wife was running against him, Marcos, and millions, I mean literally millions. I have pictures of people on the freeway, and Jay's in this limo with all the books in the back going to the keyboarding facility, and they were making progress at the rate of a mass of people. So that wasn't so bad, but then a month later, Typhoon Dot hit and killed all power on the island. And there was lots of water in the computer room, and we were at a 4-way grid for the power, but all power stations were out. So very limited power, lots of brownouts. We weren't going to finish the project, and the machines got wet. It's just a mess. So Jay and I flew to Mexico City and got all but 2 volumes from Omar, and Jay flew them to Jamaica to keyboard them there, and Hurricane Kate hit.
Ireland is next, I assume. Right?
Well, so for lots of water, damaged machines, people's homes were absolutely destroyed. I mean, this thing on the East Coast, there have been lots of hurricanes. Not everybody's been hit by them in the U.S. as hard, but man, it's hit the Caribbean before. So weren't going to get it done there, so we got the books out of Manila and took them to Beijing. And in November 1985, in Beijing, China, you remember what happened?
Yeah, Tiananmen Square.
Nothing.
Oh, nothing?
We finished the project on time, under budget, the right accuracy level, and Brian Canan, who was my project manager, says, when I saw your contract, I thought you spelled out those act of God clauses in unusual detail. I didn't expect you to use every one of them. So we've had very exciting adventures in information science over the years.
You must have burned up your extra money in that contract.
We actually did all right on it. I mean, we didn't make as much as we thought we were going to make, but we didn't run in the red on it either. We hadn't expected that many airplane trips, which it becomes expensive. But the data was good. The keyers, bless their hearts, did really well, and we left some volumes in every place and then brought them all together. And we've converted a lot of fascinating stuff. We did the case law for Germany, the Staudinger. We did the Slovakian Parliament. We've done work with.
How have you gotten in touch with all these folks? Do they just wander up to you at ACES or SLA and say?
Well, a lot of them contact us, but we have continued to do a lot of exhibiting at different meetings. Although I haven't done any really for the last 2 years because I'm not sure I'm not sure that that's the way to market anymore. I think that social and internet marketing is the way to go, and we are doing that. But it isn't, social media I don't think is the way, but I think making your presence known through other means like the blog and authoritative papers and so on are useful.
Well, back to ACES. Why have these folks left? Is it because the academics came in and began to dominate the ACES meetings?
I think the
and
intellectual
membership?
rigor is not there to the level that it used to be, which is a pretty damning thing to say, I suppose, to a bunch of academics. But it's because it's become very insular, and I am fortunate. I think that I am widely respected and liked within ACES, and if I say something, people listen to it. But if you're somebody else and you come in, if you don't have or aren't working on a doctorate in information science, you're thought of, I think you're thought a little less of, and by the same token, the people that are really ACES customers, those that are trying to implement information science and make things happen, aren't coming to our meeting anymore because they aren't hearing things that, like I did early on, that they can apply in their everyday life. I can remember people talking about one project or another that I would be able to apply. I remember an early paper by Doug Ord, actually, on cross-language retrieval. It was absolutely fascinating. He was spot on, and it was stuff that I could apply. I had a thorny little issue with the European Parliament at the time. It had the Office of Official Publications of the European Union has a thesaurus called HlavaREV1, which is in 27 languages, several character sets, Greek, Cyrillic, English, and extended Latin. And it was a thorny issue that I hadn't quite come up with the right solution for it. And in that paper by Doug, there it was, the nugget I needed to make it happen. And when you go to meetings and you hear those kinds of nuggets, you keep coming back. You keep wanting to hear another nugget that you could apply. And I know that the U.S. government badge people, the CIA and NSA and even FBI used to come a lot to our meetings and listen in. They were the middle row.
I don't think they come anymore.
They don't come anymore because they're not hearing that stuff.
Yeah.
The Office of Research and Development for the CIA, Bill Aldershot used to come to all the meetings, and he'd always glean something.
Yeah.
But he's not gleaning anything from those meetings anymore. I think the topics are just not applied.
What year did ACES give up having exhibits, and why?
I think about we have to look that up.
You were president in '94. Right?
I was, and we didn't have exhibits anymore in
Okay,
'94.
yeah.
I think they probably gave them up in the early '80s.
Early '80s?
Yeah.
What must have been a considerable economic impact on
Yeah,
on
Sam
the
Beatty was the
society.
executive director when we gave him up. It was before Dick Hill's time. And I'm not sure who was president or what all happened, but I know that, actually it wasn't far off from the time that Wiley had to bail us out.
Right, right.
Because the fiscal management had been a challenge, I think, and ACES stopped.
This is just after the Eric CLIS fiasco also.
Yep.
And,
Those were also very interesting times.
yeah.
And you could come to ACES and get the real gossip. Not true anymore. If you wanted industry gossip, man, ACES was the place to be.
Yeah.
And for those of us that are trying to make our living in it, that's important.
Yeah, I haven't seen government folks there much at all.
No,
So
well-
I joined, first meeting was '94,
Uh-huh.
when you were president. And I remember a few being there, but now you seldom, if ever, run across any of those.
Yeah, I don't think there was, check. I do comb through those registration lists for ACES every year
Mhm.
to see what the
Yeah.
percentages are
Yeah.
like. I really don't go to ACES for business anymore, and I don't go to ACES for ideas, which is too bad.
Yeah.
And my company indexes the bulletin, and we index the journal for ACES, and we produce the proceedings for ACES. So we still, although there isn't really a publications committee anymore, I do produce all those things, and I told Sam Hastings when she was president that I'd get a digital library for her by the end of the term, and we did. Got it done. And so I have a real good idea of what the publications are like, and we also index ARIST, although ARIST is, I don't know, changing in its complexion.
Yeah.
But the journal also used to have an applied section that Lois Lennon would usually edit, and then whoever was the editor of the journal would make sure that it was very much applied, and it's varied over the years. I mean, I don't really think of it as a precision and recall journal anymore, although for a while I really thought that's what it was about. But it's not, really doesn't have a lot to do with search anymore.
Well, what were the issues during your time on the board and as president? Any significant ones?
Well,
that
finance and fiscal stability was something that we faced pretty early on in my early tenure on the board. And I was fortunate to be on the finance committee with Buzzy Bash, who has got a very keen fiscal mind. I think people don't necessarily know what Buzzy does exactly, but
other than
I can tell
run
you
his
that,
subscription company?
yeah, but I can tell you that he can read a financial statement like nobody else.
Yeah.
He's just
He
incredible.
still comes to the business meeting.
Yeah.
I was at it the other day. And
Because I'm not bad at reading a finance statement, and I know that Dick Hill used to dread it if Bonnie Carroll, Buzzy, and I would be sitting together in the back, because he knew he had to know his numbers, because sure shooting we'd question him on them, and we did. I mean, but that's what the meeting was for.
yeah,
And we did manage to get ACES stabilized, and now it's then with the Information Architecture Summit, which I think is the exciting meeting now for the society, and it's also where the lion's share of our revenue comes from, because that's the happening meeting. You know, the annual meeting is kind of the
well, for academics.
the academic world, whereas the mid-year meeting, the Information Architecture Summit is very exciting. That's where new ideas are coming forth. That's where you'll see people who are implementers instead of academics, people really interested in implementing information science. And they party late, like we used to party at ACES, and so you drink and you laugh, and then you talk some serious implementation stuff, and whether it's search, precision recall, accuracy levels for data, how you really index something so that people can pull it out again, whether you want to use ranking or weighting or some other measure in figuring out what kinds of stuff ought to come out first in retrieval, all that stuff. I don't hear it anymore. I really don't. I don't hear that. I hear about some social issue stuff, and social issues are important, but it's not what drags
They're
in
not
people who have
implementing
to.
information systems and
Usually not.
testing them and
Yeah.
reporting on it, huh?
Yeah, it's not keeping up with Google. It's not trying to figure out is Endeca better than Lucene and why. That kind of stuff just doesn't happen.
Speaking of Google, an enduring question in my mind is, how did we lose out when we were doing all these things that Google later did in terms of retrieval and, search rank and online stuff and all that, and yet information science people don't get any credit for any of those kinds of things.
Now, Gene Garfield gets credit, as he should,
Yeah.
but because he's really the father of bibliometrics. But how long since you heard a bibliometrics talk at ACES?
No, there are some, not
But
many.
not many.
Kate
Yeah.
Kate McCain.
Kate McCain will do one on occasion, and others, and those are usually good conversations, but by and large, you aren't hearing them. So,
But I mean,
Kevin.
we had all this vocabulary stuff that we worked on for years and years, thesauri, et cetera, you know.
Do you know the
searching
classification
stuff.
research meeting this year was all classification? It wasn't thesauri, it wasn't taxonomies, it wasn't authority files, it was classification, which isn't so broadly used anymore. Numeric sequences and so on. So it was a surprise to me that that's what they were talking about. But it's probably comfortable. I think maybe some people talk about things that are comfortable to them. And, you know, to some extent, if you're on the cutting edge or bleeding edge, it's uncomfortable. It's not always an easy place to be.
Interestingly enough, at our history pre-conference, we did have close to a third of the papers were on classification.
See?
So viewing it historically,
Yeah.
Still an important issue, but yeah.
Well,
Classification and related kinds of things, I should say, about, you know, thesauri, et cetera, but.
And sorry I couldn't attend that, but I was glad to be home and not
Yeah.
cooling my heels for a
It was
week
a
in the
good
storm.
Okay, so no major problems that you recall during the time you were on the board?
Well, when I
Except
was, when I, I lost to Yosei, and then I was convinced to run a second time for president. So I wasn't elected the first time I ran. I lost by only a few votes reportedly, but I didn't win. But I had been real active in this strategic realignments thing, and on a committee for that under Ann Prentice with Ann, and Dan Robbins was particularly leading that effort, and helping us shepherd it through. But I was the one that was tagged as the person to implement these changes. So as we were really lucky, I think, ACES was, that we had Ann Prentice, Yosei Marie Griffiths, and then myself as a presidential string. And during that time, we completely revamped ACES and its organization. There had been a move afoot to try to reclassify the SIGs into 6 by subject areas. And man, that was a ton of bricks being dropped on some very unhappy people. So it didn't happen, and I think it's probably just as well it didn't. And then we followed up in the following years trying to realign ACES, because we'd had a tremendous amount of calcified committees. I mean, we had committees that had been around for 20 years and nobody knew what anybody did anymore, and they were overlapping each other, so try to make it very clear. So when I was president, we cleaned up the committee structure. Then I was followed by Jim Rush, and he was followed by Cliff Lynch, and those two guys finished out the job. So we started it when I was chair of strategic planning under Ann, and then Yosei called me up when she won and said, "I can't do this without you, Margie." I said, "Okay, well, I'll fold my wounded feathers and be helpful," and then I was elected the next year. So we were able to do this 5-year-long reorganization of ACES where everybody bought into the plan from the beginning, because Cliff and I had been on Ann's board and then finished off with Cliff, so Cliff Lynch.
Oh.
So implementing that plan went very smoothly. It was very nice that we were able to do that. So with that, we were able to get ourselves in a pretty clean footing. Dick Hill was a very able administrator and didn't want to get in the way of information science. So he felt, and I think has always felt, that his job is to run the organization. He's really the chief operations officer, and he makes that platform solid so that other people can get their agendas through when they're on the board, and he's maintained that, done really well. We've been lucky to have him, I think. Not everybody agrees with me, but I think he's been good for ACES. And now it's a small gang, but it runs very smoothly, and most of its staff has been there like 16 or more years. It's really amazing for an association to hang on to association personnel that long in Washington, D.C. area, which is constantly swiping people from each other. I mean, they just do it weekly, I swear.
Why do you think membership continues to decline now?
Because the vibrancy isn't there. I mean, we're back to the, what do I get out of ACES? What am I going to learn from ACES? What can I take home from the meeting that I can apply in my daily work? And, okay, so I forwarded the future of my doctoral students. I gave another paper, which will be good for my career as a promising academic. I gave a paper because that'll help me get tenure as an academic. Did you hear anything about how I did a really cool project and that can be applied? It was applied here in this scholarly publisher, and it could be applied in 5 others. You just don't hear those papers there anymore. And you know, and then the industry has had this love affair with the semantic web. SGML was not implementable unless you had very deep pockets, because it was very complex. If you make something very, very complex, very few are going to implement it. So part of what many members of ACES helped with was implementing something that was simpler. And those people aren't at ACES. The people that are making XML simpler, or making search simpler, or making indexing simpler, for the most part, just aren't there. They're somewhere else. And so you get taken over by these people who want to do a 1,000,000-line triple store so that they can do linked data. Well, you know, the computer science guys are just eating our lunch. Kevin Boyack and I did a study for the IEEE. And we took 10 years of IEEE Explore, we took 10 years of the US patents, and we took 10 years of Medline. And we indexed all of them automatically using my software. This was easy for us. We indexed all of them using Mesh and DTIC and the IEEE Thesaurus, which I updated. And then we visualized the results in 430 different pictures, so you can do a flip deck, you know, kind of thing. Seeing where is the industry moving, where are the edges of this science, what happens with biochemistry and bioengineering and biomedical kinds of things, and medical engineering, and where's the field going? Where should the IEEE, who is the client, where should they publish new journals? And where are their existing journals publishing less? Good study.
And where was it published?
Well, we gave it to the IEEE, and it wasn't published. And we actually have an article that we asked for permission to publish in ACES, in JACES, and we didn't get permission because one of the journals in the IEEE has not published on its core topic in the entire 10 years. It's published a donut hole around it, but it hasn't published on the topic. Though, you know, they didn't really want that known broadly, so I'm not going to tell you what journal it was. But, you know, that's actionable intelligence for them. And I gave a report on it at Harry Collier's meeting in Nice last year, and quite a few people came up to me and asked for a similar study to be done on their stuff. So, and big companies like BASF and Bayer or Bayer, and so some pharmaceutical firms, some big German publishing firms, some French companies, and so on. So all of them are interested in that kind of capability. And, that's the kind of stuff we learned at ACES. It's the kind of papers that if we were hearing them at ACES, we'd probably get a lot more practitioners. There's a limited audience of academics who can spring the cash to get to ACES. And if that's all we're going to appeal to, we're going to be a shrinking organization. I mean, there's nothing wrong with our member services or member retention. Has to be based on two things. One, you have to feel fairly welcome to the group, but the other is there has to be something that you can say, I went to the meeting and I gained this, therefore it was worth the week of time as well as the expense. I don't think we're getting a lot of actionable
You
intelligence.
don't see any way to attract these folks, or could ACES do anything different?
Well, it's happening at the IA Summit. People
Yeah.
really are getting what they want. They're getting ideas for how to implement and extend their portals and their web
Not
presence.
much of that stuff is getting into JASIS or even into the bulletin.
I think none
Get
of
a little to the
none of it's
bulletin.
getting into JASIS.
Yeah.
None of it. I don't think JASIS is seen as a vehicle for that.
Place.
It's a great international prestigious place for non-member, non-US people to publish. But, if you did an analysis of the authors in ACES, and I haven't done this, but I'll bet that you would find that very few of them are actually ACES members.
Yeah, a lot of computer science folks who are
Yeah.
not members. Yeah.
And that's the other study
Yeah,
that
particularly from
Kevin and I were able to do, and he and Dick Clavins have expanded even further, and that is that information science is not where it's happening. Library science is certainly not where it's happening. Information science is eating the lunch of library science, and computer science is eating information science's lunch, because information science used to be the text guys. If it had to do with text, full text, we were it. And as you point out, people like Google have stolen that march on us. I mean, we no longer are the big guys in text retrieval. Should be. We're not.
Yeah.
We don't even invite those people to talk.
Even the text retrieval workshops, whatever you call them, very few of our folks are participating in those anymore. So you don't see a turnaround possible? Maybe you need to do this kind of study non-proprietarily and.
I think we probably
Let's see.
need, it's been, 20 years since we did a strategic realignment of ACES that really involved, I think the board did one recently, because I'm no longer on the board, but I think it needs to look beyond academia and look to the people who are going to apply the stuff that we theorize about. And you got to reach out to those folks, because there's a lot of people looking for meetings. And looking for places to be a member of, and I myself am shopping, going, where have my customers gone? They're not at ACES, they're not at SLA, and I know what they're doing. They're shopping all these little meetings, like the text analytics meeting, or the Semantico meetings, or the Wilshire conferences, or the Tom Hogan meetings, Information Today meetings, although I think those have diminished. And it's a combination of things. People aren't going to meetings as much. And the military librarians meeting in December, which is usually a 400-person meeting, and pretty cool. I mean, really applied intelligence has been canceled this year because government travel is so restricted. So people aren't traveling, they're looking for some other kind of venue. So everybody and their brother is given a webinar. But the ACES webinars are pretty well attended. I did 5 of them, and Joe Bush did, I think, an equal number. And those were very popular. People really signed up for them, and they were like, I don't know, I think $50 or something, a lot cheaper than.
Or many of them are free.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're painting a dismal picture of
Sorry.
the future.
I think a bunch of people got together and brainstormed it, we could figure it out, but I think it needs to be, I don't know, there used to be a past president's reception at the annual meeting, which didn't happen.
Yeah, it's still held.
Did it?
I think so. I don't think it met this year, but.
Yeah, it meets intermittently now.
Oh,
And it had two purposes. One was to give the incoming president a notion of our support. But, that was awkward, because the new kid on the block has their own agenda and their own plans, and we have no business trying to say, if you were president, you should do X, Y, and Z. They're not going to buy that. Why should they? I mean, they've just become president. They got their own agenda. But the other thing that frequently happened at those meetings, people talk about the state of the business and ideas on how to help ACES. And since those are the people that are invested, invested at least a year, usually 3 years on the board. And in my case, I was 3 years on the board, and then I was another 3 years, and I think that's pretty common for somebody who becomes president. So you got 6 years of service to the society, so those people would have a fair idea of what to do. But so many of them now are solely academic, whereas in the past you had a lot of crossover people. People worked in the private sector, worked in the government, and also worked in academia. And we get fewer of those now. We get people that are pretty vertically integrated, which is interesting because you think information science historically has knocked down all those silos, and yet we have people who are siloing a lot.
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, this is interesting. I hate to quit, but I think, one, I better get home and cook supper, and secondly, you're worn out from talking, I'm sure.
Well, yeah, we could brainstorm a bit further, but I think this is probably a good place to wrap. Besides, I saw the bride and her new groom out there a bit ago.
Okay.
So they're upstairs somewhere.